imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole? Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of election, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's live Friday edition. It is April 12th, 2013. And on tonight's edition, as I said all week long, tonight I'm going to be focusing on not gun control or the craziness of the New World Order, but I'm going to be going back in time yet again to one of my, I guess you could say, favorite conspiracies, if there is a way to say favorite conspiracy. I don't know if that comes out right, but the JFK assassination. Many of the newer listeners might not know this, but this is one of my specialties, I guess, in the conspiracy genre, would be the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And all year, starting here in 2012, I've been doing at least one show, if not more, usually at least one, but usually two per month on the Kennedy assassination, focusing on different things, bringing on different guests to talk about different aspects of the assassination. And a lot of people say, oh, God, it's over, who cares? It was 50 years ago. Well, exactly, it's the 50-year anniversary this year, and that's why I'm bringing as much spotlight to it as I possibly can. And I'm actually planning on going out to Dealey Plaza this year for the 50th and live broadcasting from Dealey Plaza. And I've had researchers from not just inside the United States, but from other countries on as well, like Lana Sanic. So he's up in Canada. So, I can't dedicate enough time to cover this. And I came here to Unbound, recently. We just launched 2 weeks ago. And I've been wanting to do a Kennedy show, but I wanted to make sure we got all the kinks worked out. And now that we got all the kinks worked out, I want to dive back into it, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So when we come back from the break on the other side, I'm going to bring my guest on tonight. His name's Vince Palamara. Some of you might know who he is. Some of you might not know who he is. After tonight, you're going to get a chance to know who he is. You're going to get a chance to hear me pick his brain. Vince is a super smart guy, and he knows a lot about the Kennedy assassination, especially the Secret Service and their stand-down. That's right, because the president couldn't have been killed unless his bodyguard stood down. Kind of like on 9/11, things couldn't have happened unless there was a stand-down order. So we're going to get into that when we come back. Don't go anywhere. Vince is also writing a book he's got coming out. I'm going to be picking his brain about a ton of stuff. You don't want to miss it. We'll be right back. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. I'm going to get right into it. Nice, long segment. I want to introduce my guest for this evening, a JFK assassination expert, an all-around intelligent guy, and I'm proud to say, a good friend of mine, Mr. Vince Palamara. Vince, welcome back to the broadcast.
Oh, welcome, Popeye. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
I want to hop right into it. I want to introduce you a little bit to the newer listeners because, I know the older listeners might know who you are, but I have a whole new audience out there. So I want to take a few minutes to introduce you. I'll give you a brief, quick intro here, but then I want you to take some time and introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll get into the Secret Service stand-down. For those of you that don't know about Vince, a quick, I guess you could say, catch-up course on him would be to watch Part 7 of the Men Who Killed Kennedy series. That's actually a good introduction to his work, and then I would suggest purchasing his book and following anything he's released article-wise or research-wise. But if you watch The Men Who Killed Kennedy Part 7, and I know most people are going, Part 7, what are you talking about? I thought it was only a 6-part series. Well, they tell you it's a 6-part series, but it's a 9-part series. The last 3 parts they kind of put in the round file, and 7, 8, and 9, if you watch them, you'll understand why they put them in the round file, because the other 6, well, there's some evidence here and there that's conclusive maybe to smaller parts of the assassination and the conspiracy, but the last 3, well, they're kind of bombshell episodes, I would say. And Vince was in Part 7, which was the smoking guns. And that really went into the Secret Service and the role that they played in the assassination. So, Vince, I've taken up enough of the airtime. I want you to go ahead and talk. Just give a quick, brief intro, I guess, of how you got into this and a little bit about yourself, and then let's hop into the Secret Service stand-down.
Sounds good, Popeye. Thanks. Yeah, just a thumbnail sketch would be to pick up about the History Channel's The Men Who Killed Kennedy. Yeah, that was... I got this from 2 different customer service people at History Channel. They were adamant about this. This was the most watched documentary, not just the JFK assassination. Anything they had on the program, on the channel, was that Men Who Killed Kennedy, Part 7, 8, and 9. The ratings were through the roof. They sold over 50,000 of the DVD at $20 a pop at the time. We're talking 10 years ago for the 40th anniversary, 2003. So they were tremendous commercial success, and they were shown between 4 and 5 times each episode. So you're saying to yourself, well, what happened then? If it was a tremendous commercial success, rating success, they made a lot of money, blah, 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 what happened? Well, in April 2004, several months later, well, the Part 9 one dealt with LBJ's involvement in the assassination and cover-up. Well, surviving members of the Lyndon Johnson family, a few former presidents, Jimmy Carter, President Ford, some of the people that were still around at the time, Jack Valente, and so on and so forth, got together with Robert Dow because they said, look, we've got to squelch this. Enough's enough. And they did a real piecemeal, kind of silly rebuttal, if you want to call it a rebuttal. And then what they did was they threw the baby out with the bathwater. They didn't just get rid of Part 9. They got rid of Part 7 and 8. The 7, 8, 9 were taken off the market despite the people's demand for the show, and 7 and 8 had nothing to do with number 9. And in that insult to injury, the History Channel / A&E stopped showing parts 1 through 6. You can still get 1 through 6 on commercial DVD, but 7 through 9, luckily a lot of people bought it, is basically YouTube or bootleg.
They don't even talk like it exists, though. If you go on to the History Channel website, or if you go on the Netflix, because they have it, they used to have it available for instant streaming, and then they took that away. Now I think you can only get the DVDs to rent them. But when you even then, it didn't matter whether it was instant streaming or whether it was just the DVDs. They only say it's a 6-part series. Netflix, and of course Netflix isn't part of the conspiracy. They're getting their information from the History Channel. But the History Channel is the one that put it together, and they know damn well that it's a 9-part series, and where are the other 3 parts? Well, when you start to watch them, it's like, oh, I understand why they don't want you to see this now.
You got tremendous medical evidence. You have Drs. Aguilar and Mantic did a phenomenal job in the medical evidence. You have Professor Fetzer of Murder in Dealey Plaza fame and several other books on there. You have a whole episode dedicated to me and lead author Judith Baker. You have the aforementioned LBJ part, which is really good, by the way. Walt Brown's on there. Gar McClellan, several other people.
Brings up one of my favorite questions to ask people, Vince, is whose mysterious fingerprint was found on a box inside the quote-unquote sniper's nest that was, it was round-filed, and after it was discovered whose fingerprint it was whisked away. Exactly, Mac Wallace. And who was Mac Wallace but a henchman for LBJ? So you have a henchman connected to LBJ, directly connected to him, whose fingerprint is on a box in the quote-unquote sniper's nest, and nobody thinks that that's shady.
Yeah, and the guy was a convicted murderer. He was also tied to Billy Saul Epstein's. There's no doubt about his tremendous criminal background. You know, and he got away with murder in more ways than one. His fingerprint's up there. I mean, he had a fingerprint expert. At least one, really. This guy had credentials out the wazoo, confirmed it was his fingerprint. All his years, all his decades, and no one, the unknown fingerprint until, they did a match and it's Mac Wallace. Well, yeah, that's basically what it boils down to, that, the powers that be, literally Big Brother was watching. And, I think that they probably would have made waves if the show would have came and went, if it didn't do well in the ratings, but it did phenomenal in the ratings. It did phenomenal with the sales of the DVD, so they just took everything away, and there you go. But luckily, a lot of people are much aware of it. In fact, even if you go onto Amazon, you see a lot of reviews and like, "Where's part 7, 8, 9?" So a lot of people are much aware, and like I said, you go on YouTube and they're there. But so that was my big introduction to people at large. But I've been in over 60 other authors' books. Most notably, I have 2 old chapters in Murder Dealey Plaza. Back up, I'm 46 now, and I've actually been in the case off and on since I was in middle school, and that was at the time of the House Select Committee on Assassinations in the late 70s. But I took a serious interest in 1988 25th anniversary, and again, as a thumbnail sketch, we're jumping up to early 90s now. That's when I started to do primary research, and I was on the Secret Service, because I realized, as a guy in my early 20s at the time, I really hit on something. I just did a paper at the time for the third decade, Jerry Rose's journal, at a conference in Fredonia, New York. About 60 seasoned researchers there, a lot of them old enough to be my father or grandfather. And they told me, wow, I guess that's why the Secret Service is so secret. I've never really thought twice about them. Vince, you should do something about this, because they liked my paper. My paper dealt almost exclusively with secondary sources. It was a good synthesis. So I just went crazy and just tried to contact every living agent I could find. Keep in mind, before the Internet kicked in. So a lot of this was hunches, networking, directory assistance, et cetera, et cetera. And everybody has a turning point here. David Nitson always talks about the Sodder and O'Neill report was his turning point in the case. Every author and researcher has one. My date in infamy, for me, is September 27th, 1992. And what happened on that date was I phoned the special agent in charge of the White House detail, Jerry Bain, B-E-H-N, Bain. And just talking with them, and now keep in mind, I had no axe to grind at that point. I basically believed a lot of things. I had a tremendous interest in the Secret Service, but didn't think that there was anything conspiratorial necessarily about them in a general sense. So, making a long story short, I believed a lot of the hokum, I call it now, that, well, President Kennedy was reckless with his security and didn't want this and didn't want that. And I broached the subject to Jerry Bain, just thinking he was going to confirm it, because all the books told me that that was the way it was. And Jerry Bain said, I don't remember Kennedy ever saying anything about not having agents on the back of his car. If you look at the newsreels, you'll see agents on there. I almost dropped the phone. I couldn't believe he said it. Luckily, he consented to being taped. The guy died of cancer about 6 months later. And I'm just thank God that I spoke to him and I got it on tape, because if I didn't speak to him, he's the number one agent. People would always throw back in my face, Vince, you didn't talk to the number one guy. Or if you got it on tape, people would be like, how do I know he really said that?
But all I'll say is the video. Look at the video as they make that right turn on the Elm. And you see them make that right turn as they go around that corner, right? You see, I forget his name, the one that got waved off, but he's sitting there and he's looking like, and he's throwing his hands up in the air like, what the F? What are you doing? I'm supposed to be on the back of the limo. Why am I being waved off? And he looks at his supervisor, whoever it was, I forget his name too, but he looks at him like he throws his hands up like, what the hell, right?
Yeah, see, what that is, that's actually, left field, but you're leading into what's happening on Elm Street, so definitely very apropos here. Yeah, And initially, I misidentified the agent as Henry Ripka. It turns out that the agent who throws his hands up in disgust was Don Lawton. However, Henry Ripka is what's a little confusing. Henry Ripka actually was there at Love Field, actually did walk beside the limo, and then was immediately relieved by Don Lawton, who we see in the famous WFAA ABC black and white video. Okay, ostensibly, underline the word ostensibly, they were part of the Love Field detail, looking at their luggage. Come on, give me a break. Don Lawton rode on the back of the car in Chicago in March 23rd, 1963, and 4 days before in Tampa. Here's a protective agent, and he's relegated to luggage. I mean, come on, give me a break. But yeah, that's what you see in the video. I discovered that in 1991, or I should say I popularized it. No one ever really talked about it. Most people's reaction was, Vince, I never saw it before until I saw it on the History Channel or back in the mid-'90s when you show it at your conferences in Washington, D.C. and whatnot. And it's Emory Roberts who is the commander of the Agents of the Fall Car. Well, Don Lawton started, Henry Ripka originally did it, and then he's replaced by Don Lawton. Don Lawton's walking along beside the limo, looking like he's about to jump on the back with a little handhold. Emory Roberts rises to his feet and using hand gestures, obviously his voice, tells him to cease and desist. And that's when he raises his arm like 3 different times in seeming disgust at the time. And the thing about Emory Roberts is crazy was Seymour Hersh, when he did his book, The Dark Side of Camelot, interviewed several agents who were disgusted with Kennedy's private life, which goes to motive, and it's amazing these guys are to protect Kennedy and were disgusted with him. Well, one of the agents, Tim McIntyre, who rode on the Fall car, talked about how Emory Roberts was very concerned about JFK's sordid private life and said, you know, he talked about it a lot and he was concerned. And then McIntyre in the same interview goes on and talks about he and his colleagues felt abused by their service under President Kennedy. He was disappointed by what they saw. Well, he was brand new to the detail. He just joined in the fall of 1963. If Emory Roberts is having these kind of feelings and Tim McIntyre is speaking about his anger and disgust about JFK, he just joined the detail, well, guess what? Emory Roberts, who was there since the Truman days, had to be a huge influence on his feelings as well. And that's the guy who's recalling them. And he also, when the shooting began, he tells them not to move. Sam Kennedy told me that was exactly right. I said, oh, this is unbelievable. He ordered them not to move, and the shooting began. I'm thinking that's one of the reasons why Clint Hill was late, and John Reddy started to react, but he recalled him back to the Fall car. So not just the Love Field in action, but then you also got what happened on Elm Street, and you also have what happened in between. Other than 4 brief times when Clint Hill briefly rode on the back of the car on Main Street, on Jackie's side only. He was a Jacqueline Kennedy First Lady detail agent. No one rode on JFK's side or got near his side of the car. But you go 4 days before in the Florida trip, there's agents on the back of the car. Many trips the agents were either on the back of the car, walking, jogging, or running beside the car. Okay? That was standard operating procedure. I mean, it's in my book coming out in September, Survivors Guild. I interviewed many agents. This isn't just theories or Vince's twist on things. It came from the agents themselves. I mentioned Jerry Bain before to be #1 agent. Well, the dominoes fell one after another, like you were reading cue cards. Total stranger on the phone or in writing, and these guys all lived in different parts of the country, independent of each other, said the same thing over and over again. President Kennedy was a very nice man, never interfered with our actions at all. Agents frequently rode the back of the car, or at least they jogged beside the car, and all this stuff. It's like, wait a minute. Okay, so $64 million question. They blame Kennedy for it, authors based on the Secret Service, okay, blame Kennedy for, allegedly not one of the agents on the back of the car. The buck stops with the Secret Service. They're saying after the fact that it was Kennedy. Now they're telling me in private it wasn't Kennedy.
Vince, I'm going to cut us off right there because we got the break. We got the break sneaking up on us. But okay. I want to pick back. I want to get back into this on the other side because this includes the whole bubble top thing and everything else. So yes. I'm going to pause you right there, ladies and gentlemen. Don't go anywhere. Vince and I will be right back. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Now, Vince, when we got cut off by the break, you were getting into the whole myth that it's Kennedy's fault that he got whacked in the back of the limo because he didn't want any protection. He didn't want the bubble top on the limo. I mean, is this a concerted effort to blame him for his own murder?
Yes, Popeye. Yeah, basically what it boils down to is that people, whether they believe Oswald acted alone or the majority believe it was a conspiracy. There's a school of thought out there that there's stubborn. They think, well, Kennedy, his favorite saying, his favorite poem was, I have a rendezvous with death, and he was reckless with his private life, and he was reckless with his security, and he was difficult to protect, and ordered the men off the back of the car, he ordered the motorcycles away, he didn't want the bubble top on, and it's a whole lot of crap, whole lot of bunk. And what it boils down to is, you don't have to take Vince Palamara's word for it. I have these men in writing, on audio tape. It's a landslide. I call it in my book a landslide of truth. You have former agents, not just buck privates like Jerry Blaine of the Kennedy detail. You've got high-up agents in Kennedy's detail telling me this. President Kennedy never interfered with their actions at all, never ordered them off the car. It had nothing to do with the bubble top. Sam Kinney, the driver of the flop car, was adamant to me. Turns out it's also with his initial report and his interview with the House Select Committee, that he was solely responsible for the bubble top's removal. There's even a shade of gray with that. Even though the bubble top was bulletproof, many people thought it was bulletproof, so it was like a psychological deterrent. But many agents said that they thought that the bubble top would either deflect a bullet or it would obscure an assassin's view via the sun glare off it. But many times the bubble top was on the car in a partial form, meaning the rear piece was on, the front piece was on, and the middle section was open so that occupants could get air and JFK could intermittently stand. I went through all the photos and archives from a lot of these different trips between 1961 and 1963. Okay, 3 years. And I found many occasions when the bubble top was on the car, either partial or full, many times in good weather conditions too. Now, the bubble top, I concede, was not used nearly as much as, with the agents being beside the car and whatnot, but it was used a hell of a lot more that Clint Hill and some of these people would lead you to believe, like Jerry Blaine acts like it was only a few times in inclement weather. Not true. And again, it's this mythology. It's William Manchester's death of the president, Jim Bishop's The Day Kennedy was shot, the Warren Report itself, based on the Secret Service reports after the fact. Kennedy's dead. They're worried about their pensions. They're worried about maybe criminal negligence, or worse, they're worried about their reputation, the agency losing the protective functions going to Jan Hoover's FBI. So they invented this mythology at the time. And now, decades later, they're not remembering it. They're remembering the truth when they're talking to me on the phone, okay, or they're putting it in writing. And more importantly than all the many former agents who told me it's a landslide, well, then you also have a lot of White House aides, staff, non-Secret Service agents telling me the same thing. And using that same catchphrase over and over again, never, okay? And what it boils down to is, again, the $64 million question, conspiracy or no conspiracy, and other than a crisis in faith one time, I definitely believe there was a conspiracy. I mean, go no further than Doug Horne's great books, Jim Douglas's books, and Sherry Feister's Enemy of the Truth, the list goes on. But
well, I just think I see this whole thing as a way of demonizing him. Again, and Jim Douglas talked about this in his book too, how now they're demonizing Kennedy because the truth is coming out. So now it's a matter of, okay, we have to make him look like a piece of crap. So, hey, it's okay that he got whacked because he was a scumbag, right? He really had some low moral fiber, I guess. So he was a piece of crap. Who cared? I mean, that's the way they're trying to go with it now, and they have to frame. They're framing the argument basically. And like you said, I think it's interesting how my mom used to tell me when I was a kid, it's easy to remember the truth because the truth is always burned into your head. But a lie, you forget a lie, you forget the details, 3 or 4 weeks later. So here you have 50 years later, and these guys are completely forgetting the lie, and they're telling you, well, Vince, blah, 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 because they're telling you the only thing that they can remember is what really happened, whatever their brain really logged in. Unless some of them, I'm sure a few of them have gotten phone calls or somebody paid a visit or whatever and said, hey, maybe you don't want to say this or that. But, I mean, who are they protecting? Who's still alive from 50 years ago? What power that shouldn't be is still around that these people are protecting? I mean, there's a question to ask. I'm going to cut us off because we got a break sneaking up on us. Ladies and gentlemen, don't go anywhere. More with my guest, Vince Palamara, when we get back on the Secret Service stand-down in the JFK assassination. Don't go anywhere. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back, and we're going to get right back into it. So, Vince, before we get into the Kennedy detail, present day and what's going on with the surviving members and their books, I want to plug the real book that people should be purchasing and paying attention to, not Bill O'Reilly's crap and all those other books that's coming out for the 50th. I mean, there's a ton of other books on the JFK assassination I've talked about. You know, Judith's book, Me and Lee, Ed Haslam's book, Dr. Mary's Monkey is a good book. You have to get that if you read Judith's book. Sherry Feaster's book. But nobody knows about your new book yet, at least a newer listener. So go ahead and plug the hell out of it.
Okay. Yeah, my book is called Survivor's Guilt. That's the main title, Survivor's Guilt. The subtitle was The Secret Service and the Failure to Protect President Kennedy. Doing very good on Amazon, Goodreads, all the major sites right now. It's doing tremendous in pre-sale. I just want to thank everybody. And yes, it will be available on Kindle, by the way. Some people are wondering if it's soft-cover, hardcover, and Kindle. Yes, it will be available in all formats. It's coming out officially September 1st, 2013, but it is available now in pre-order. And what it boils down to is I contacted every living agent that protected President Kennedy in some form or fashion, either permanently or part-time. We're talking from 1990 through just like a couple years ago, all those years, okay? Many years before a certain other former agent came out with a book in 2010 based on 5 years of so-called research, but we won't get into that. But basically what it boils down to, my book exposes the lie put on Kennedy. Kennedy was not difficult to protect. He didn't order the agents to do anything. He was a very nice man, very cooperative, okay? And it goes piece by piece. Every issue you can think about is dissected, and it's not theory, it's fact. It's based on interviews, it's based on documents, primary source information through interviews, documents, files, photos, the whole 9 yards. Massively documented. The publisher, TrineDay, they are just shocked at how documented the book is. But that's another story in itself. But I go through everything you think of about the buildings, the overpasses, the motorcade ride, the trademark versus the woman's building, prior trips, comparing security. I even go into the post-assassination period up to LBJ, a little bit to Nixon. But the whole thing about the assassination is dissected in tremendous detail, and it's based on years of research. Maybe you could argue it's 20-plus years in the making of this book, and it's many interviews. It's about 80 former agents and then White House aides. You have Dave Powers, Pierre Salinger. So I went right to the horse's mouths, and it was a stranger on the phone or in writing, a little old me. And one thing I want to pick up from before the break, all these gentlemen, former agents and White House aides, were telling me all these things. And what really says it all was many of them in the same breath would say, "Oh, Oswald acted alone. You should read Case Closed or something." So it wasn't like they were sitting there, tinfoil hats and all this stuff that people cast aspersions on us. They were still, spouting the official line and saying things that went against official history. That's really telling that they were telling me. Is again, a stranger on the phone, and that brings us to the Kennedy detail. The most important thing I think my book acts as is the antidote for what they're basically trying to do is the 50th anniversary. Is they're trying to tie up all loose ends. They wanted to end. They want the controversy to end. They thought Case Closed, Gerald Plauser was going to do it 20 years ago. Norman Mailer, Vince Palamara. Well, they're hoping this is going to seal the door shut. And what they want to do is they want to leave the legacy with Kennedy being not only that he was reckless in his personal life, they want it to be that, well, we couldn't do any more. The Secret Service did all we could. President Kennedy didn't want us in the back of the car. He didn't want the motorcycles next to us. He didn't want the bubble top on. He wanted the route to go the certain way. Washington wanted us to go to the trademark. Darn it. And it's all bull. And the Kennedy detail, Gerald Blaine, not Bain, Blaine, B-L-A-I-N-E, when he came out with this book in 2010, the importance about that was that book literally originated from me. And what it was in the summer of 2005, I sent a 22-page letter to Clint Hill. He had an unlisted phone number, hadn't spoken to any private researcher ever. I got his private address from Lynn Meredith, who's now passed on. He was one of the agents that protected the Kennedy kids. Well, the letter was a Cliff Notes version of some of my work, and he was not too thrilled with it. Turns out, I did not know at the time, he was best friends with Gerald Blaine. And Gerald Blaine, when I'm talking to him a couple days later, is basically quoting verbatim from my letter to, and they live states away, too. So I was like, wait a minute, let's say a fax machine or whatnot. How's he reading my letter? Then lo and behold, I'm getting news in 2009. There's this book, The Kennedy Detail, from Jerry Blaine. Jerry Blaine wasn't even in Dallas. What's he writing a book about? Well, oh, boy, I wonder if it was my letter. Then in press interviews, Jerry Blaine admits he began his book in the summer of 2005. When I saw some of this stuff on the Internet, I knew that we had to tell the true story of what went on. Then I get a threatening letter from his attorney about my blog. A little shot across the bow. And then Jerry Blaine admits on his blog that the director of the Secret Service, who just stepped down, Mark Sullivan, was briefed by Clint Hill and himself about the purpose of their book, not only at the Secret Service headquarters, but at their former association meetings. So this book was definitely officially sanctioned and blessed, so to speak, and that's what they want to do. Not only do they want to say Oswald acted alone, there's no conspiracy to get a life, they also want to lay the pablum out, and because basically what it boiled down to, they were upset. Clint Hill and Jerry Blaine, these two guys now, because they're like, whoa, oh my God. All the callers, what are they doing talking to this stranger? Why are they talking to this young kid? Why are they saying these things? No, we can't have this come out because it's going to make us look bad. We can't let the truth come out. So we have to. So it's a comedy because in my book I expose the lies of the Kennedy detail. He doesn't have a leg to stand on, and then you'll see. Like the whole thing about he makes up this thing that supposedly the day of Kennedy's funeral there was a meeting, and conveniently everybody in the meeting dead but Jerry Blaine. And supposedly the meeting was, we can't let people know that President Kennedy ordered us off the back of the car, so we have to keep this hush-hush, men. In the meantime, his book espouses that very theory, and that came out in the Warren Report, Clint Hill's testimony, and it was based on Floyd Boring, which is a long story I get into in my book. But the whole thing, that's what they try to do in his book. And they thought that they heard the last of me, and that was going to be it. But then on C-SPAN, Hill and Blaine, out of nowhere, Brian Lamb showed a little YouTube video of me and discussed my research and whatnot. And then a couple years later, Clint Hill, again, out of nowhere, starts talking about me. And Lisa McCubbin, the co-author of both Blaine's book and Hill's book, on Goodreads, all of a sudden I noticed that she marked my book to read, so she's going to read my book. They're worried. They're basically worried about what I have to say because they know that a mountain of colleagues, that a lot of them passed on, are espousing something totally different from Jerry Blaine. Jerry Blaine is hoping to hoodwink society. He wants the youth of America to believe that President Kennedy ordered them to do certain things. And now, this Vince Palamara dude that we thought was just going to be online, like a fly in the ointment, he's going to be this guy who has blogs. We don't have to worry about him anymore. He's coming out with a book, and the party's over. Because Jerry Blaine was just a buck private. He only served in the Secret Service for 5 years. But then you got the General MacArthur of the Secret Service, so to speak, Jerry Bain, okay, served from 1939 to 1957. He was his boss, telling me the total opposite of what he espouses in his book. Floyd Boring, who was the number 2 agent, served for like 30 years, same thing. It's amazing how, again, all these gentlemen, all their colleagues, okay, tell me something diametrically opposed to Jerry Blaine's book. And now they got a Hollywood movie they're trying to make, a little, it's supposed to come out for the 50th anniversary. I'm understanding now from some of my sources that they're running into money problems. So maybe this movie is not going to be coming out. We'll see. I know Clint Hill has another book coming out for the 50th anniversary because his book, Mrs. Kennedy and Me, which is basically a lighthearted book for the most part by Jacqueline Kennedy, did really well. The Kennedy detail was like a mild bestseller, but Mrs. Kennedy and Me was a huge bestseller. But basically what it boils down to, all these Oswald Did It books and all these JFK Had It Coming books and whatnot, they're trying to wrap the public. They want to put it all in a bow and say, 50 years later, Oswald acted alone, President Kennedy didn't want certain things done, and that's all there is to it. And they don't want people like Sherry Feister's tremendous book, Enemy of the Truth, Mark Lane's Last Word, Jim Douglas, JFK the Unspeakable, Doug Horne's books, and my book. They don't want those books to do well and to go, for the public to buy them and to read them and digest them, because they'll realize that the real story goes against their propaganda. And that's where we're at now. But it was my 22-page letter to Clint Hill in the summer of 2005, which was like the atom bomb that blew everything out. And one thing I got to tell, this is amazing. Robert the Prospero was the #1 agent for Ronald Reagan from 1982 to 1985. He served the Secret Service from LBJ up to like mid-Reagan era, so like 1965 to 1986. He wrote me out of the blue last year. And you would think this was a guy who would be kind of in the enemy camp, so to speak. And he told me, I've been watching you work for many months, and I appreciate your willingness to tell it like it is, and your accuracy, and your research, and your facts. And he's been a good friend of mine ever since. And I'm blown away still to this day that a guy like that, I think he'd be the type of guy who'd be writing me and saying, how dare you cast aspersions on my colleagues? Instead, a guy of this tremendous stature. I mean, this guy is the reason why a lot of the modern Secret Service, the last 20, 25 years, a lot of the techniques, he invented them. He popularized them. The magnetometer searches, having an agent at the hospitals now, that's all because of him. Okay? And a guy like that wrote to me and basically endorsed my work, which speaks volumes. And I can tell from some veiled things he said, he's no fan of the Kennedy detail. Some of the agents are very, a guy who comes out of nowhere, Jerry Blaine, the Kennedy detail, only served in the Secret Service for 5 years. 5 years is enough for a Secret Service agent to come out. He wasn't even in Dallas. That's the big thing. He was not in Dallas. He was in Austin at the time. And his book is all in the third person. There's no source notes, no end notes. You can't tell who's saying what. He's speaking for his dead colleagues, and take his word for it. My book is heavily documented. You know who's saying what. You can go to the sources. You can check it out. Okay? It is what it is. They said stuff that's totally against official history. And this whole thing, people always think that, that's only modern-day Secret Service events that they check buildings now. Because of the Kennedy assassination, no. Not true. They did check buildings, rooftops, and windows before the assassination. That was standard procedure. In fact, Huey Bauman, who was JFK Secret Service chief before Raleigh took over in 1961, even said after the assassination that we have to do an investigation because he didn't understand why Jackie had to crawl in the back of the car. Why weren't agents there? Buildings were checked. That was standard protocol. So he basically spilled the beans a few weeks after the assassination. And these articles are online. You can go to Google and do a search, and you'll find a lot of amazing things on there.
Well, look what Fletcher Prouty said. He was the chief of special ops. He was the first chief of special ops. And what did he say? He said none of those windows should have been open. There should have been Secret Service and special forces detachments, mixed with the Secret Service to help bolster the Secret Service because it was a hostile territory. They would have been in there 2 weeks ahead of time.
Right. So, and you know what, Popeye? Fletcher Prouty has been vindicated. I know there were some people after he passed trying to cast aspersions on him and say, Fletcher Prouty, he was talking about the Eisenhower days, and that's isolated incidents, and he's trying to use Secret Service of today and trying to go back in time and saying that's the way it should be. Well, the man has been vindicated. Mike Torino was the chief inspector of the Secret Service. He wrote the Secret Service manual in the 1950s that is still used to this day with, obviously some amendments for, later technology and times and whatnot. Mike Torino even came out before the assassination in a couple books about the Secret Service and said it's standard to have the military augment the Secret Service for security. He also said it's standard for the agents to walk or jog beside the car and not to be relieved.
Vince, I'm going to cut us off because we got the break coming up. But when we come back on the other side of the quick break, I want to reiterate this point again because that's important. Because, like you said, a lot of people try to disparage Prouty. All right, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We will be right back in a few short minutes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, a short final segment of the first hour, but we still have hour number 2 here with Vince. Vince, going to break, we were talking about Prouty, Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty, being vindicated. And what we were talking about is that he had said, look, no, there should have been Secret Service all over the place. There should have been Army Special Forces working with them to bolster their ranks. None of those windows would have been open. Nobody with an umbrella would have been able to walk down the street, let alone open it. There would have been Secret Service guys all over the place. And they love to say No. That's nowadays, but back then they didn't do that. Really? What is this, the days of Abraham Lincoln where he would go out riding on his horse by himself? I mean, what kind of asinine thinking is that, Vince?
Yeah, you're right. You know what? Fletcher Potty has really been vindicated through the years. And again, there was a segment of people, I don't know what they were trying to pull, but like a few years back, I actually had people out of nowhere write me, then Fletcher Potty's claiming the Secret Service had a manual. Is that true? And it's like, yes, any organization has a manual, but they definitely had one. Michael Tolina wrote the darn manual. He was the chief inspector of the Secret Service who I actually corresponded with several times. He passed away a few years ago. And there's no doubt, let's just clear this up right now. It's in my book, documented. Fletcher Potty's been vindicated. There's no doubt in the Kennedy era and before, and at least in the Eisenhower through Kennedy era, and obviously since, military augmented the local police with the Secret Service. I mean, these news articles I got online about how when they went to Venezuela, Puerto Rico, and the list goes on, and the military, and also domestic trips, the military, intelligence, whatnot, were working with them. There was even times, now this was not all the time, that's why I didn't try to make it out like hyperbole, like all the time. There was even times helicopters were used for security on some of the routes Kennedy used, like, for example, Nashville in May of 1963, a helicopter was used on the route. So Fletcher Potty, the whole thing about him has not been blown out of proportion. It is not using the lenses of the then 1990s to go back in time. He's been vindicated. It's in my book. There's no doubt about it. And who vindicates him? Secret Service agents who probably don't even know who he was, or maybe vaguely knew who he was. So they had no axe to grind, and probably a lot of those guys fought Oswald after the loans. That's another thing, too. Can't stress that enough. These guys weren't saying, oh, yeah, I believe this and this and this. They're saying, oh, let's hope them. Oswald after the loan. And at the same time, they're telling me things that go against official history. Everything's compartmentalized. And again, you brought up a very valuable point, Popeye, earlier. You know, the truth sneaks out. The lie can only be remembered so long in certain contexts, but eventually the truth just seeps out, and that's what it boils down to there. So yeah, there's no doubt Fletcher Potty has been vindicated, and you'll see a segment of my book on that. There's a chapter that really people are going to, like a light bulb's going to go on and go, wow, that segment of the Men Who Killed Kennedy, like part 1 or 2, wow, that segment was not hyperbole, that was true. And we were talking during the break, some interesting things. Everybody knows about the Cartagena, Colombia drinking incident last year. One of the agents, David Cheney, resigned in disgrace over that whole matter, and that actually led to the Director of the Secret Service stepping down, Mark Sullivan. Well, David Cheney's father was George Cheney. George Cheney was a JFK-era agent, and we all know about the drinking incident the night before of the assassination, where 9 agents, including 4 agents in the fog car, including our beloved Clint Hill, was drinking the night before, staying out late. Paul Landis stayed out till 5 a.m. They had to report for duty at 8 a.m. So we're not only talking alcohol consumption, sleep deprivation. Well, here's another thing, too. Hillary Rodham Clinton, Secretary of State, former First Lady, possible presidential hopeful. You will not find this in any book, and I uncovered this during an interview with a gentleman by the name of Don Cox, a revered Secret Service agent during the George Herbert Walker Bush era and Clinton and George W. Bush era. Remember the White House details during that time. He just waited on me out of nowhere, said, Wade Rodham, JFK, now I'm paraphrasing this part, the JFK-era agent Wade Rodham, that's Hillary Rodham Clinton's uncle. Well, who's Wade Rodham? Yeah, if anybody out there, I'm sure you've seen this out there, listeners, there's really nice human interest films of President Kennedy in Wexford, their estate in Middleburg, Virginia, also known as Atoka, A-T-O-K-A, and that really cute footage of the horse. He's eating the grain out of Kennedy's hand, and Jacqueline with her rider's cap is crouching down and showing JFK Jr. how to salute, and Caroline riding her pony and in the woods and the farm and all that. Well, that's Middleburg. Wade Rodham was the special agent in charge of the Secret Service of the Middleburg residence. He's a veteran of the Secret Service. He protected Vice President Nixon in Caracas, Venezuela during the rock throwing incident and all that. Well, that's Hillary Rodham Clinton's uncle. You won't find that in any book. And it's crazy, that kind of connection, and no one's ever made a big... Yeah, it's pretty neat.
That woman is pure evil. Now, I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to say that there's any connection between her and good old Bill and the JFK assassination, but it just goes to show you that, man, they do have a select pool that they pick from. They're ever faithful, little useful, whatever you want to call them. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time with hour number 1, but hey, we still have hour number 2 coming up, so don't go anywhere. We'll be back in about a minute at the beginning of hour number 2, so stay tuned. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with hour number 2 here on tonight's live edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. It is April 12th, 2013, and tonight I am talking with JFK assassination expert Vince Palamara. Vince, we have a short, quick beginning segment here. We only have about 3.5 minutes before we go to the break. So really quick, because there's a ton of stuff to get into here. And I really want to spend a little bit of time focusing on the whole Greer limo stop, limo pause thing, a couple different things. Yeah. So we can cover that in the next segment. But really quick, I want to ask you something. Do you think, and this isn't a really a Secret Service question, this is more of a shooter question. Do you think, and this is I'm gonna set it up for the second part with the whole limo stop, but do you think that there would have been a need, and Sherry Feaster brought this up, do you think there really would have been a need to stop the limo completely, or just slow it down enough to make sure that he got into the kill zone? Now, she made a good point from her standpoint of, well, they really wouldn't need to slow it down at all. I mean, for the forward shot, if there was somebody up on the triple underpass. But for me, knowing how a military operation works and knowing how these guys would work, that's something that it's just that added making sure, overkill, whatever you want to call it, but they're making, I don't say he stops it completely, but I say he slows it down. Would you say, in your opinion, that that even needed to happen, and if it needed to happen, do you think it did?
Well, here's the story. Okay, I do not think the car stopped. I think it just slowed into people's perception. It looked like it stopped because it slowed down to it went from 11.2 miles an hour, which is pretty slow to begin with, down several more miles an hour because Greer looked back not once but twice. He disobeyed Lloyd Kellerman and the line was been hit and looks back again until Kennedy's hit in the head. And to answer your question about whether it was germane or was it important to the operation, so to speak, to happen, I will look at it this way. My first response would be to say yes, because it's making a slower target, which is more dangerous and more, advantageous to a shooter or shooters to have the target slow down and move faster. Because like if they were going on Main Street, for example, straight down Main Street, the car was moving a heck of a lot faster, so the chances of a successful assassination would have been much less. So I do not think it stopped. I think it slowed down. I do think it was important, but I do think that there's an out for Greer, even though it's still gross negligence. I think it's a byproduct of him turning back twice, and his foot was taken off the accelerator by looking back twice, which is obviously gross negligence, horrific. Even people like Vince Palamara and Gerald Paz would even concede that he's the reason why the assassination was successful, albeit they think Oswald acted alone. But even that camp is even conceding, Greer. It's basically because of Greer that the assassination happened. I mean, even got Dave Powers in 1988 on Charles Kuralt's little Sunday morning show, basically laying the blame on Greer for what happened, and Greer was also very remorseful for what happened. So, precious piece of videotape. All the I'm
going to pause us right there, Vince, because the break is sneaking up on us. But you see, okay, we got to continue on the other side into this, because this is one of those topics that seems to get thrown around back and forth. So, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We will be right back. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. We got a bit of a longer segment now, so I can sit and pick Vince's brain. Now, Vince, what we were talking about in the first short segment, I think Greer, now this is this is from my research, okay? And people can and what I like is I like that there are different researchers that have different opinions, but that I can have a conversation with them about it. And if they think I'm wrong or I feel they're wrong, there's no yelling back and forth. You know what I mean? It's actually an intellectual conversation. But you and I are on the same page about this. But not everybody believes that Greer was in on it. That maybe he was, like you said, negligent, criminally negligent, maybe, grossly negligent, however you want to put it. But I think he was chosen to be the driver for a reason. I think him slowing down, again, I agree with you 100%. That's why I wanted to get your take on it really quick. I agree it is germane because as a shooter, to me, it would be, hey, you're making my job a little bit easier. Thanks, Greer. You know what I mean? They might not need to have it, but in a situation like this, like Fletcher Prouty's, his writings were used for the Mr. X character in the JFK movie, okay? And he brings up, there's one line in there that Donald Sutherland says right at the end. He's like, it doesn't matter the amount of money that's spent, how many people have to die, he cannot be allowed to live. That is a coup d'etat. So they will go to any length necessary to make sure he didn't make it out of Dealey Plaza. They had to, because if he survived that, there was going to be some hell to pay.
Yeah.
There is, you know what I mean? You can't, oh, well, we almost got him next time. No, there won't be a next time.
Right, because then the party is over because the security would automatically be bumped up every trip from that on. That would be the wake-up call in. And some listeners out there automatically going, aha, Vince, this is leading into another area. And yes, it's covered in the book. I'm going to tell you, the book is tremendously detailed. I got a whole lengthy chapter just on Greer, by the way, and I got to bring this up. This is why there's shades. Nothing's black and white in this case. Everything, there's shades of gray, because while at the same time I'm sitting there espousing the notion that it's just gross negligence, well, Bill Greer, he passed away in February 1985, and he had one son, living son. He had no daughters, no multiple kids, just one son, Richard. And I called the gentleman back in 1991 and just started out the conversation. He was a nice fellow. I talked to him a couple of times, and I asked him, what did you think of JFK? Nothing, dead silence. Very awkward. It was obviously he heard me, and I just went on to other things, and I went back to it a second time. So, Mr. Greer, sir, what did your father think of JFK? Another little pauses. Well, we're Methodists, and JFK was Catholic. Before you can wrap your head around that, well, it turns out that Bill Greer was born and raised in County Tyrone, Ireland. Didn't come to this country until he was about 19 years of age. Well, as most of you listeners probably know, there's been fights between the Protestants and the Catholics in Ireland for eons. So rather than just tell me, oh, my father-in-law, President Kennedy, the feeling was mutual, to not answer that question to a stranger and then to come along with that cryptic, well, we're Methodists and JFK was Catholic. Did his father feel that way behind the wheel when the shots were ringing out? And then, again, I go into tremendous detail about Greer before, during, and after the assassination, not just on Elm Street, but a lot of things before. And some people might know out there, but this is still very interesting. He worked one summer on the estate of Henry Cabot Lodge, who was a bitter opponent of JFK politically. He was our ambassador to Saigon in Vietnam. He ran actually twice against JFK and lost the Senate race, and he was Nixon's choice for vice president in 1960. So JFK basically beat him twice, and you've got the whole Vietnam thing. And Greer had to be much aware of the Kennedy family before he ever became a Secret Service agent, because he worked on in Boston, Massachusetts, and around that area as a chauffeur, and he had to have known about all the allegations of bootlegging with Joe Kennedy Sr. and all the controversy there. So again, it harkens back to what Richard Greer said. And then before we can catch our breath on that, earlier I made mention about how in 1991 I discovered / popularized that video of the agent being recalled at Love Field. The agent who throws his hands up several times and discussed. That's pretty much, well known now because of, I showed it on the History Channel, I showed it at conferences in 1995. It's on YouTube because of me, and some other people picked up on it. Well, what is now known in certain quarters, and I go into this in the book, a month before the assassination, not after, 1 month before the assassination, one of the drivers, Secret Service drivers, died suddenly. I found this out in the late 1990s, total fluke. This was nowhere in like regular books. This was not a common knowledge. It was in no book, pro or con conspiracy. What happened was former agent George McNally, who later became head of the Signal Corps, came out with a manuscript. It was privately published. You talk about one of the most obscure books. I think The Last Hurrah had some copies in Williamsport. Got a hold of the book, and it's non-indexed, but out of nowhere, in the chronology, obviously was 1963, George McNally saying, one of the drivers, Tom Shipman, died suddenly. Well, I did more research on it. Make a long story short, he died October 14th, 1953, of a heart attack, allegedly, at Camp David. Okay? Now, Deb Galantine, a great researcher friend of mine, just discovered a couple obscure news articles on it through some heavy digging. But there's no official word from the White House, nothing from JFK, nothing from Peter Salinger. The famous photo of JFK Jr. under the desk and JFK's up above laughing, I guess rustling some papers with JFK Jr.'s looking out from his desk, that's October 14th. So on that same day where JFK's climbing around, one of the chauffeurs who drove him fairly regularly, the Greer obviously drove him the most, but Shipman drove him a fair amount. I have pictures of him in September of 1953, the month before he died, driving Kennedy. He drove Kennedy in Milford, PA, for example. He drove him several times in D.C. in the late summer of 1953. And Sam Kinney, who was one of the drivers, told me it was Greer, Shipman, and himself that drove Kennedy. And now you have Tom Shipman, who dies, and Greer is driving Kennedy in Dallas, and the $64 million question is, if good old Shipman doesn't pass away, and then we can go into a whole lot of can of beans, was it murder, or was it just an accidental death? Greer drives and Shipman's not there, he's not around anymore because the guy's dead. And then you get the whole thing, you look at the history of the Secret Service from 1865, 19th century, okay, up to the present. There's only something like 35 agents who've died in the line of duty. If you take away the 5 or so that died in the Oklahoma City bombing tragically, and a few that died in car accidents and whatnot, okay, and the one who was a White House police officer, Leslie Coffelt, in 1950, the Truman attempt. There's a precious few agents. None of them ever died at Camp David. The only one connected to JFK in any way, shape, or form was this Tom Shipman, who drove them, who died at Camp. Nobody else died at Camp David. There's nothing I did a Google search on this in archive news. Looked everywhere, couldn't find a thing. Deb Galantine, to her credit, recently found a couple Maryland newspapers. They were not the Baltimore Sun or anything. They're real obscure ones that I never even heard of. They just mentioned briefly that he passed away, no details. And he was very, very quickly, no toxicology, nothing. He was like, boom, he died, throw him in the coffin, that's it. He died of a heart attack, that's good enough for us. Next. And then when people hear that, if they have suspicions about Greer and the whole thing about what happened in Dallas, you say to yourself, wow, this isn't tinfoil land, this isn't conspiracy theories. This guy died the month before the assassination in the most weird circumstances. And the guy was a fit Secret Service agent. He wasn't like an old man. Just a collapse of a heart attack in one of the bungalows at Camp David. Bizarre. And then when you mix what Richard Greer, his son, said, well, we're Methodists and JFK was Catholic. Then you get down to the nitty-gritty of shooting. He looks back once. Roy Kellerman's peer says, get out of line, we've been hit. He disobeys, is looking back again until Kennedy's hit in the head. You ask yourself the question, is it gross negligence? Is it fate? Is it something more sinister? And then that's that whole can of beans. And my book goes into all. You're gonna learn a lot of names of specific agents. I go into specific facts. It's not theories, and it's not a whole bunch of hokum about, my personal travails in the case. The book is nothing but facts. It's not like, we're going to go through 20 pages just to get to the good stuff. It's nothing but the good stuff from the first page to the last page. I think 50 years is enough of let's go on and pad these books with a whole bunch of, rigmarole. The book is nothing but documented. It's basically, in my opinion, a scathing indictment of the Secret Service. And I'm a big admirer of the Secret Service, too, mind you. I mean, other than the tremendous failure in Dallas, I mean, he's done a lot of good things before and after the assassination, so this is not a witch hunt. It is what it is. I mean, these men told me what they told me. It is what it is. If it was something different, there would be no book and life would go on. But I found what I found. It goes against official history, and thus there's a book, and it is what it is. But
well, did they ever do an autopsy on this driver that was died at Camp David the month before?
Yeah. There was no autopsy. He was just buried. That was it. There was no toxicology test, nothing.
Okay, you know how shady that is? Because when someone dies of quote-unquote natural causes or a heart attack at a young age, there's always an autopsy done because it's not natural for someone to just drop dead. So they do an autopsy like that to make sure that the person have heart disease or whatever.
Exactly, and these guys are I mean, even back then...
And it's at Camp David, too. Let me remind you. So you would think that if you found a dead agent in a room at Camp David, holy crap, put everything on lockdown, we need to have this guy autopsied ASAP. And there's no autopsy, no toxicology report, and they throw him in a hole. No, that's not shady.
Yep. That's shady as hell. And again, you can date that day because that's an infamous day where JFK is smiling and JFK Jr. is looking out from below the desk. It's the same day. There's no statement from the White House that just want to say Thomas Shipman, one of my agents, passed away. God bless him and his family and his time. Blah blah blah. Nothing from the White House. Nothing from Pierre Salinger. Nothing from the White House. Only two obscure Baltimore area newspapers, not the Baltimore Sun, not the big papers, small papers. Just mention a real matter of fact, but the big thing that Deb Galentine knows is, wow, he died and he's buried, and it's like, wow, there was no toxicology. They just took it as word. Yeah, he must have died of a heart attack. It's like there's no, like today they would have been like, whoa, hold the fort. Something is amiss here.
CNN would have had breaking news. Wolf Blitzer would have had a situation room. They would have been breaking, do with the breaking news music in the background. Oh my God, Secret Service agent found dead at Camp David. Oh my God, blah, 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 blah. It would be all over the place. Right. And they don't even bother to do a toxicology report on the guy. They just, dude, come on, really?
And again, it's like Russian roulette. It's because he's out of the mix. You got Kinney, who, by the way, was a very good guy. I mean, it's in my book. He was not one of the bad guys, so to speak. He was definitely a good guy. And there's too much time to go into it. But he's a good guy. And then you got Greer behind the wheel instead of Shipman. So there you go. Quirk of fate or something far sinister, and there you go. But here's again, it's because of me, little old me, that people know about Thomas Shipman. It wasn't like, well, Vince, other people, this came out, independent of you. No, because that manuscript, 3 people in the world saw that? No one saw that. For all intents and purposes, no one knew about it. Just like, technically with ABC video, no one knew about it until I started showing that video in the mid-'90s, and it got on the History Channel, and it got on YouTube. Because no one looked at the Secret Service. Everyone cast aspersions, rightfully so, on the CIA and the FBI and the Mafia, and the list goes on. But people have a tendency to say, wait, the Secret Service, these are the bodyguards. Hey, man, don't go there. They're there to protect the man, for God's sake.
You don't kill a sitting president, okay, and get away with it without the Secret Service being involved, the head of the FBI being involved, and the vice president being involved. It's that simple.
Right.
It's that simple. Right. Anybody that thinks that some lone nut in a school book depository with a horrible rifle, the world's worst shoulder weapon ever invented, nicknamed the humanitarian rifle because it was such a piece of crap. This guy, you would think the first shot would be the best one, and then they would get worse as time went on. But it actually gets the best shot is the third shot. See, none of this makes any sense. Ladies and gentlemen, we got a break sneaking up on us. Don't go anywhere. Vince and I will be right back. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. So, Vince, Sherry Feaster, her book.
Yes.
I've had her on twice. She's a very interesting lady, to say the least. She is super, super smart, by the way.
She's awesome. I love her. Yeah, she's great.
I love picking her brain. I've gotten a chance to talk to her off air as well as on air, and I've gotten a chance to pick her brain about the forensics and because it's interesting to have a forensic perspective on, especially the crime scene itself. When you focus on the crime scene, we talk about the Secret Service aspect of it, you get a chance to talk about maybe where you think the shooters were. But until I met Sherry, I never got a chance to actually sit down with a CSI type individual.
Yes.
You get a forensic investigator's view on things. And I laugh because I said to Sherry, she reminds me of Catherine Willows from CSI. So we had the JFK assassination, but looking at it. And there's a few things that what's nice is you don't have to agree. Not everybody agrees with each other, which makes for intelligent conversation. Because then sometimes you're like, hey, maybe they're right. They might bring up a good point. Maybe you're wrong or whatever, or vice versa. But I agree that she destroys a lot of these. The Oswald magic bullet did it story. She even helps get rid of a lot of the disinfo that's out there. Her book is great. It helps sort through a lot of. And
something we said during the break, I've got to bring up, Bob. I got to do this, man. Her book, Enemy of the Truth, it's excellent. And there's two things in the book that are terrific. Every pro-conspiracy author and researcher, I think, always says there's the elephant in the room. They don't want to admit it. But the Vincent Gwynn study of the House Select Committee that allegedly says that the bullet came from Oswald's gun, her chapter on that is brilliant. She destroys Vincent Gwynn. There's nothing left of Vincent Gwynn when it's over. So that sacred cow of Vincent Gwynn, the HSCA studies and neutron activation analysis, is destroyed. If nothing else, her book is worth the price of admission just for that. The other thing is the whole issue of beveling of the skull. It turns out now, this is one thing we could talk about in modern technology, modern crime scene detection, beveling is a joke. They don't even use that now. That's so unreliable, pro or con. And her book is so brilliant because people that espouse Oswald acted alone always point to Vincent Gwynn. Vincent Gwynn's been destroyed. The beveling of the skull proves the shot only came from the rear. And her book destroys it. It destroys it scientifically. It doesn't destroy it with an axe to grind. It's fact. It's not like, well, let's Sherry spin on things, Vince. No. And you read it. I'm telling you right now, because even I briefly had a crisis of faith when I talked about it in an old show about 7 years ago, and one of the things was Vincent Gwynn and the beveling, and she destroys that. I'll tell you right now, just very quickly, because we'll get back into the Secret Service, but just very briefly, some books I highly recommend besides Sherry Feister's Enemy of the Truth. You got to get Jim Douglas, JFK and the Unspeakable. You got to get all 5 volumes of Doug Horne's books inside the AARD. You got to get Judith Baker's Me and Lee, and a book we never talked about. It surprised me. I only got it for the collection, thinking there was going to be a bunch of secondary sources and forgettable. The gentleman's name, he's 80 years old, bless him. His name's Charles Hurlburt, Hurlburt, and the book's called It's Time for the Truth. I'm telling you right now, it is the best book I have ever seen as far as, okay, enough of the theories. Give me the proof there was a conspiracy, darn it. This book is one-stop shopping. You don't have to get a mountain of books and papers and spend hours on the Internet. What Jim Mars and Crossfire attempted to do, but it's 1989, see, it's dated because so much stuff has come out since 1989, and even that book's real hefty. This book is like 1/3 the size of Crossfire, but it just came out earlier this year. Again, Charles Hurlburt, It's Time for the Truth, shocked me. It's a tremendous synthesis. It's not so much there's new information. It is the best synthesis of everything. So instead of to try to convince somebody, well, read this book, go there. Here, read this book. That proves it's a conspiracy. That book does it right there. So I had to throw some shout-outs to some other authors. And one more thing, I almost forgot. The new edition of Destiny Betrayed by Jim C. Eugenio, his first edition was good for 21 years ago. New one is phenomenal because it digests all the releases from the AARD. It's almost like a completely different book. It totally vindicates a lot of, I almost can't believe I'm saying it, Jim Garrison, because he's been a very controversial figure. Some people think he was a nut and all that. There's people that put him on a pedestal. Well, James C. Eugenio does a tremendous job showing how much. I'm gonna
cut us off, Vince, because we got the break sneaking up on us. But you know what? I want to pick up with Garrison when we come back because that's an interesting point you made. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We will be right back in just a few short minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. So, Vince, we got cut off. I wanted to get into Jim Garrison. and I know we were talking about Garrison a little bit, but I wanted to bring him because you're right. Garrison is a controversial character, I guess you could say, in the assassination research community, whatever. And some people, like you said, they think he's great. They think he's a god. Other people think Garrison is a complete Looney Tune a-hole and want nothing to do with any of his research. I don't think he's a god, and I don't think he's an a-hole. I think Garrison was a human. I think he had his flaws, but I think he did a really good investigation, especially for the time period that he was dealing with, and the just mountain that he was up against. He was this little district attorney in New Orleans, and he was going up against the federal government, and they were bugging his office. They
blocking extraditions.
Yeah, dude. It was just, I mean, for what he had available to him, I think Garrison did a pretty good job. Now, I don't think he was a perfect human being. Some of the things that Garrison did, and some of the things that he might have said along the way, or some of the conclusions he might have come to, I don't agree with. But also, Garrison didn't have all the knowledge that we have to this day. You know, it's interesting. I've talked to Judith about this. He knew of her. He just didn't know her name, but he knew that Oswald had been with a female.
Oh, yeah, I kind of remember her saying that. It came up in the context of something. I remember, yes, right.
Well, she said it multiple times in the interview. So when I've interviewed her before about, her book, Me and Lee, and, Lee and everything else, and the fact that, ladies and gentlemen, that's a whole side subject. First of all, you need to listen to my interviews with her. Second of all, you need to go get her book, and then you need to get Ed Haslam's book, because they go really well together. I'm going to tell you what, if you read Judith's book and then you read Sherry Feaster's book, between the two of them, you're not going to believe that Oswald did it. You're going to be like, no way, sorry. If anything else, not for any other, if for nothing, if for no other part of the conspiracy, but just to exonerate Oswald, those two books combined together, because Judith's book gives you some background on Lee and also humanizes him, because the way that they vilify him is the court of public opinion, right? Oh, he's a monster, and they put up pictures of him, and they always try to make him look crazy and everything else, and all these rumors. He's not around to protect himself, right? So, I mean, who cares, right? So she is able to bring that element of humanity back to him, which is awesome. And then Sherry's book totally destroys the fact that Oswald did the shooting. So it's like, okay, obviously there's a conspiracy, because if it wasn't him, who was it? You know what I mean? And if there was a shot in front, who was it? So, I mean, Garrison, he's an interesting individual. Like I said, he knew of a lot of stuff, but he was limited in his scope of things. So he did know of existence, but you know what I mean? So, what do you think about Jim?
What I think is, and again, speaking of another Jim DiEugene, brought up before the break, his the new version, not the old one. It was good for the time. The new one of Destiny Betrayed. How can I put it? It rehabilitates Garrison so much in the eyes of any doubters and skeptics, because I talked about the elephant in the room before being Vincent Gwynn when it comes to people that, oh boy, maybe Vincent Gwynn, did he have something there in the neutron accusation? Well, the elephant in the room for Jim Garrison was always Clay Shaw. People will be like, Clay Shaw had nothing to do with this. He was a businessman. This is foul what Garrison did. He went to trial and he had no evidence against this man. He persecuted him. Now, when you read Jim DiEugene's book, you get a whole different view. It made a believer out of me, because that was always my problem. Even though I think Garrison did some good when he focused on New Orleans, Bannister, David Ferry, I would always go, boy, but on the other side of the coin, I'm not really seeing a lot of hard evidence against Clay Shaw. Well, when you read Jim DiEugene's book, you get a whole different feeling. What's going to happen when you read Jim DiEugene about Garrison? It rehabilitates him, but without making him out to be a saint. It points out his faults. And what he would do during press conferences, he'd shoot from the hip. He'd say that there's no question, there's going to be arrests and this case is going to be solved. Or he'd say about some theory of the moment, like, oh, Jim, what were you thinking? Why did you say that? It definitely was investigative problems, but he was brilliant for the time, and he's brilliant today for certain things he did. Extraditions were blocked. David Ferry dies.
Well,
Oswald's already dead.
Just to go back to look at Clay Shaw for a second, okay? Yeah. Wasn't it Richard Helms who admitted in the 70s when they went back and they looked at it again? Wasn't it Helms who admitted that Clay Shaw was, in fact, a CIA agent? And he had worked for the CIA, dating back to like World War II.
Right, but what happened was that people on the other side of the coin dumbed that down and said, well, he did nothing no different than a lot of businessmen at the time. They were, anti-communist and were pro-American patriots, and they just pass along a little information. He wasn't the sinister person at Garrison. So, no, I'm on the same page with you. That's definitely very important. But what the good news is about Jim DTRH's book, that's not going to plug everybody's book, but it is what it is. They're great books. He, in a nutshell, lays out why Garrison had a case that deserved to go to trial, why a grand jury said, yes, you have a case here. We always forget that, too. It wasn't like he shot from the hip totally, and, we're just going to go to trial and Clay Shaw, and we're just going to just throw this up in the air and see what sticks. Hey, the bottom line is a grand jury convened and said, yep, you have enough evidence. And here we go. No matter how long the jury deliberated, they said there was a conspiracy that couldn't tie Shaw to it, but when you read Jim DTRH's book, you're going to find out why. There was so much more to Clay Shaw than I ever dreamed of. That used to make me wince, the whole Clay Shaw thing. That has been very much vindicated in Garrison's favor, that whole avenue. And then you realize all this stuff that was against Garrison. They said, he invented things, and he made this up about Perry Russo, and he probably put words in Perry Russo's mouth. When you see the investigation Jim DTRH does, it's breathtaking what he does. I mean, it's a kind of book that you cannot put down, and you just want to reread it again because it blows your mind. What he did to just track the whole investigation. It not only just shows all the handicaps he had to go through. I just mentioned before the gentleman that passed away during time, including Mr. Oswald, so he had a stacked deck against him. But then you realize, no, that's not true. They weren't putting words in his mouth. They took things out of context on the other side of the coin. And then you had guys like James Phelan and a lot of these turncoats and Benedict Arnold's who were trying to make Garrison out to be a nut. But again, I mean, just in the interest of time, get that book and you will see. Obviously, get Garrison's book too. But you can say, Garrison's book, what's he going to do? He's not going to paint a bad picture of himself, for God's sake. Well, then get Jim DTRH's book, and you'll see. See, right now, that's what we were talking about before. 50th anniversary, and every once in a while you get people say, it's 50 years. Come on, it's time marches on. Well, I'll tell you one thing. Interest in the case, in John F. Kennedy as a man and president, interest in the case has not died because during the commercial break, I just counted out 6 major books. Now, keep in mind, I am not endorsing the substance of some of these books. Okay, that's another story in itself. But 6 major books were huge bestsellers dealing with Kennedy or the assassination just in the past year. That's incredible. Okay, so the interest is definitely there. We don't have to go anywhere when it comes to the internet. It's unbelievable. My book is through the roof in pre-sales right now. And it goes to show you right now, the interest is there. The interest isn't going to die. Because here's the bottom line of this. JFK was, we'll get technical. Obviously, Harry Truman was on TV and whatnot. But he's considered the first TV president, the one who, was popularized through TV. In a way that's been so tremendous for the current generation because JFK is alive, so to speak, with so many people in their mind's eye in popular culture. So he doesn't feel like John Quincy Adams. It might technically be almost 50 years ago, but because Kennedy is still so alive in popular culture, you've got Caroline Kennedy, who might be the ambassador to Japan, I heard recently. You got all these connections. So anything was the last president assassinated. Even though I think people, when 9/11 came along, they thought, okay, 21st century, this horrific incident happened. That is going to now spell the end of people being interested in the Kennedy assassination. I remember people saying that. Wrong answer. It's alive and well. The interest is there. So we can throw that out at the door right there. So anybody out there who thinks that, 50th anniversary, that's going to be it. But I can tell you one thing. They are the powers that be hoping that this will be case closed. It's going to be a huge media to do. There's going to be a moment of silence. All the major networks are going to be there. There's going to be a lot of specials, and there's going to be a very pro-Oswald did it angle to a lot of things you're going to see. But hopefully some of those books I mentioned earlier in my book are going to go a long way towards showing the real truth of what went down there. And I want to talk about something, too. It's not just conspiracy theorists and authors who believe there was a conspiracy. several Secret Service agents I spoke to believe there was a conspiracy. Jerry O'Rourke was on the Texas trip, adamantly believes there was a conspiracy. As we all know, wrote a terrific book, Echo and Dealey Plaza. Abraham Bolton, firm believer in a conspiracy. Sam Kinney, the driver of the fall car in Dallas and countless other trips, the driver of the fall car, believes there was a conspiracy. He told me he thought Oswald was a lone shooter, but he was firm in his belief that there was a conspiracy. He also added this little cryptic message in there. Whoever did the shooting, whether it was Oswald or whatever, they picked that area where they knew that the security was going to be liked. It's like, what? Hello? And then Maurice Martineau was the head of the Chicago office, believed there was a conspiracy. Then you have people like Roy Kellerman and Bill Greer, who paradoxically gave testimony that is pro-conspiratorial in nature. Roy Kellerman told the Warren Commission, there has to be more than 3 shots, gentlemen. There was a flurry of shots that came in the car. Him and Greer said that the shoulder, the back wound in JFK's shoulder did not exit. They did not believe the single bullet theory in later interviews. Well, Harold Weisberg wrote me a letter in 1992, spoke privately with one of Kellerman's daughters, and Kellerman's daughter told him, and obviously he relayed this to me, that she hopes the day will come when Roy Kellerman and Bill Greer can tell the public what they told their families in private. Well, I spoke to June Kellerman, the widow of Roy Kellerman, and Roy accepted that there was a conspiracy, end quote. Pretty amazing. Paul Landis said that some of the shots came from the front, and Forrest Sorrells is another agent that said some of the shots came from the front, and whether they later on said that Oswald acted alone or not, they initially said that shots came from the front. So there you have it, roughly about 6-7 agents right there that go against official history right there. So it's not just conspiracy theorists and people that are wishful thinking. No, it's not only just based on hard evidence and when you look at things, but you actually got people in the know that were there that believe there was a conspiracy. Sam Kinney, the driver of the fall car right there, is pretty amazing. He also told me that all these books, all these years of wondering about the incredible missing piece of Kennedy's head, I had that, but no one's calling me. And I was like, what? Yeah, 1993 on the Today Show, he did a little human interest piece about the assassination. Well, in the outtakes, he told me one of the things I guess was too gory for the TV and whatnot. He said that he told them about finding the back of Kennedy's head on the C-130 transport plane. I said, Sam, you mean the back of the plane? It's not the top, the front. No, it's the back. It was like a flower pot, clean as a pin. I put in a phone patch with Dr. Berkeley. Whatever happened to it, I don't know. But all these folks are wondering about the incredible missing piece and part of his head. I had that. I'm like, what the heck? Right there, because, entrance wounds make small holes and exit wounds make large holes. If it's in the back of the head, like all the Parkland doctors and nurses and Bethesda people were saying, here's another witness you can add to the litany of, it's like a landslide, that are giving evidence directly or indirectly that Kennedy was shot from the front. Because here's Tim Kinney, who witnessed it, said blood hit his windshield immediately, okay? And again, it's paradoxical that he believes there's a conspiracy, but he's trying to say, oh, I think Oswald was the lone shooter, but I believe there's a conspiracy, and he has the back of the head. It's just like Governor Connolly. They can't get their facts straight. It's like like a stew in their mind. Like, they always try to say there was no conspiracy, but the Connollys were adamant that the magic bullet theory was bunk, and he was definitely hit by a separate shot from JFK.
Yeah, my favorite line is from Connolly. My God, they're going to kill us all. Hold on, let me repeat that one more time. My God, they are going to kill us all. Not that crazy lone nut Oswald in the book depository. My God, they are going to kill us all. Vince, I'm gonna cut us off because we got the break coming up. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. Final segment. Don't go anywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Final segment of tonight's broadcast. And just so everybody knows, make sure you stay tuned next week because I'm going to be covering the JFK assassination again. But this time I'm going to be getting into David Ferrie's death. And I'm going to have none other than Judith Baker on to talk about it. I interviewed her about a month ago. It was rather impromptu, kind of a last-minute thing, so I pre-recorded it, and I've been waiting till I got on Unbound to air it. So next week I'm going to air my interview with her about David Ferrie, and she's got a book coming out about him, so stay tuned for info on that. Vince, you've got some culprits that you want to get into. We have about 5 minutes, so go ahead. The floor is yours. Who do you think are the culprits of the day in the Secret Service?
Yes, I name names in my book, and I produce evidence. No phantom agents, no anonymous. Here's it is. There's 3 agents I'm deeply suspicious of, to put it mildly, and they are Bill Greer, the driver of JFK's limousine in Dallas, Emery Roberts, who was the commander of the follow-up car agents in Dallas. He was the shift leader, okay? And Floyd Boring, who was the number 2 agent in Kennedy's White House detail.
He was the planner of the Texas trip for the Secret Service, and that is yet another little item that I popularized, so to speak, that no one, for all intents and purposes, knew that or was aware of that he was in charge of planning the Texas trip. So basically he goes from Boring to Roberts to Greer. So it's the classic case of, yes, most of these guys were, quote-unquote, squeaky clean in just following orders, and the negligence that spewed out from that came from a handful of agents, and then we go from there, whether it was a conspiratorial or not, and I lean heavily towards that it goes beyond gross negligence with these 3 gentlemen, because the buck stops with them. Floyd Boring is the originator of the JFK ordered us off the limo thing, and yet he tells me something totally different. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Twice on the phone, I have him on tape, and I have it in writing, and then I find out, lo and behold, when I do some investigative research with Bill Adams, he's like a semi-retired researcher now. Well, back in 1999, we unearthed his JFK Library oral history, which was closed since 1976. It was opened in 1999 through the efforts of Bill Adams and I. And there's a little paragraph in there that says that JFK was very cooperative with the Secret Service. More evidence that goes against his initial report filed right after the fact to try to lay the groundwork of blame on Kennedy, so everyone would look away from the Secret Service and look elsewhere. How convenient. So it's those 3 gentlemen there. And my book, again, is Survivor's Guilt, the Secret Service, and the Failure to Protect President Kennedy. I go into tremendous detail. I name names, produce evidence. It's not theory. It's not wishful thinking. We're 50 years later. We've had enough of that game. That game's ended a long time ago, quite frankly. A lot of tremendous books have come out just in the last 5 years that, all due respect, better than a lot of other books from the last 45 or so years combined, quite frankly. And my book gets away from all that. Oh, I'm going to talk about the journey of my life through the case. We don't need to hear that. Just give me the evidence. And the book is, quote-unquote, nothing but the good stuff. And it's going to back that up. Everything I've said on the air and on this program and those 3 agents I just named, well, the evidence is there. And it's not just, well, how do we know this is true? I got based on letters. It's based on what they told me. And I'm very, very fortuitous I did what I did at the time when I spoke to these guys and corresponded, because just through the normal attrition levels of these guys being older, a lot of these guys passed away. And thank God they either consented to be recorded or put in writing, because now with Gerald Blaine's book, The Kennedy Detail, out there, who's going to believe little old me if it was just me against the world? People would say, inevitably, Vince. Come on, Jerry Blaine was a Secret Service agent. You're just some Joe Q citizen. How do we know that they really said that? Well, there's the letter, there's the tape. And thank God, again, I spoke to these guys, because it would be a question of Vince. Until you got it from a higher authority, you're just whistling in the dark, brother. Well, again, it's a landslide, because many of the colleagues said the same thing to me. It's like they were reading cue cards, and that's what the Secret Service holding the bag, so to speak. And again, it's not a witch hunt. I'm a big admirer of the Secret Service. You got somebody like Robert DeProspero, who was the #1 agent under Reagan. If you see the inaugural video of Reagan in 1981, he's one of the agents who's riding on the back of a limousine through the parade in Washington. Pretty well-known and respected agent of the Secret Service. And he wrote to me unsolicited, basically endorsing work, and he's been a friend of mine ever since. Pretty crazy. I'm almost embarrassed of his endorsement, because that's so awkward. Like, you know what? I'm basically denigrating your colleagues from, he knew so a lot of those guys that work with him. So it's like, oh, it feels awkward, but hey, he's the one who came out.
Whatever, man. It just goes to show that you're not full of crap, and that you're right on target. Vince, we're out of time for tonight. Thank you so much for coming on, dude.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it, Papa. Thanks everybody for listening. I appreciate it.
And throw out the name of your book one more time.
Survivor's Guilt, The Secret Service, and the Failure to Protect President Kennedy. Available to pre-order now.
Awesome. Thanks again, Vince. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are out of here, and we are out of time for the weekend. It's Friday. So I won't be talking to you again until Monday, but have no fear, I will be live Monday night with my good friend, Steve Starr. So until then, I love you all. Stay safe, and I'll see you Monday night.